Welcome everyone. My name is Sean. I am hot off the heels of my conversation/debate with Sam Cedar, which was completely unproductive, but definitely fun for me, although I am in fact heartbroken that he rejected my date offer. Link in the description if you want to check that out. However, over the weekend, we experienced yet again in the city of Chicago, and by we, I mean not me, because I don't live in the city of Chicago, yet another teen takeover. However, this time was a bit different. This time was a bit of an augmentation toward the normal process, because Brendan Johnson, who doesn't typically face media scrutiny like the coward that he is, actually spoke up about this, and I kid you not, he defended the kids from perceived allegations that they were Al Capones. We're going to get into this story. We're going to talk about this. But before we do that, thank you to everybody who signed up. actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay?
And thank you to my podcast listeners on Spotify, Apple, and Google's podcasting platform.
This was the scene near Roosevelt and Canal Sunday night. Groups looted a convenience store. More than 36 teenagers were arrested, along with a 12-year-old and at least one 20-year-old. Store owners say it was the second such incident in that area in just the past few weeks.
So the footage we saw out of Chicago over this past weekend is essentially the same footage that we've seen on multiple different weekends, typically holiday weekends. And it's young black teens going around making a bunch of trouble, looting stores, destroying stores, hurting people, etc., all for entertainment value. And you could see some of this footage of them looting a 7-Eleven. Now, to be clear, and this might skew your opinion on this horrible criminality and on all the assaults that went on and all the injuries that went on this particular weekend, these people might actually be Aladdin. They might be stealing from that 7-Eleven, smiling, having a good time because they are in fact desperate and they need to feed their starving family. I feel like I need to put that out there because you guys might not realize that this actually might be a cry for help. Now, that's what happened. We could see the footage. You can look it up on the internet. I'm not going to play it all that much because Brendan Johnson actually answered questions about that, and I think that is more crucial than what is actually going on right here. So let's go to the clip of the mayor of Chicago.
I'm fully aware of what I inherited. You know, the 90s were especially tough. I remember that. I was in high school. We had almost 1,000 people being murdered every single year.
So the opening of this segment is something we've heard time and time again, something that was discussed in my debate with Emma Vigeland, in my debate with Sam Cedar, and it is the go-to stupid, idiotic, moronic talking point of leftists that are interested in denying crime. And he leads off, in this clip at least, it was actually a full-hour press conference, with, I know what it was like back in the 1990s. Back in the 1990s, if you don't know, over 1,000 people were murdered in the city of Chicago in any given year. The 1990s, really bad in the city of Chicago. Way worse than right now, and I don't know if you guys know this, but the standard should always be the worst period of time in history for whatever region you're talking about. If you see a bunch of hate crimes against Armenians, guess what? That's not the Armenian genocide. Therefore, on the scale of horrible things that have happened to Armenians, that's significantly lower. Therefore, we should ignore it because, again, the standard is always 100% the worst period in American history or the worst period in world history, and crime is technically not as bad as the 1990s in the city of Chicago. Now, they did touch 800 murders last year. For the first time in 25 years, they're at 825. So while it is not as bad as the 1990s, it is a 25-year high. It is significant. And by the way, 25 years ago is actually within the period of the 1990s, although it's not the period specifically that Brendan Johnson is referring to. Just remember, again, these are all Aladdins. They're trying to feed starving orphans with big wide eyes, and they're super nice and super friendly, but also it's not as bad as the 1990s. So what are we even talking about, even though crime is up since Brendan Johnson took office? It was up under Lori Lightfoot. The Cook County prosecutor doesn't prosecute anyone, and the Illinois state legislature was on its way to passing a very similar bail law to what was implemented in the state of New York, which actually was a disaster for the state of New York. But as long as it's not 1990s levels, we can all rest easy.
And so I really appreciate, very much so, how many of our law enforcement rank and file members have really stepped up to be more of a system of care and calm.
So look, I'm not going to be against Brendan Johnson praising the police. I mean, this is a defund the police guy. He's a police abolitionist in my opinion, and in his past statements, he's definitely endorsed defunding the police, but at least here, he's praising them for the arrest that they were making, even though, of course, he's not specifically acknowledging the arrest that they were making, but it's at least nice that he's paying lip service, even though he won his election, despite being the person who he is all along. Now, in many cities, in many parts of the country, people say, well, you voted for this or whatever, and that's often completely overblown and an idiotic talking point. However, in this city, in particular, the city of Chicago, the people most impacted by the criminality actually did vote for Brandon Johnson over his much tougher on crime opponent. Now, this is largely due to the fact that he really racialized the campaign, but at least it's true in this instance, even though I'm sick of those comments.
Many people expect, us to treat people undignified. My administration is different. And as far as its effectiveness, I'll just say it like this, that some of the trends that we are witnessing, the number of trends that we have intercepted over the course of these first, how long has it been now, y'all? 12 weeks? It's been tremendous.
So if you don't know, because Brandon Johnson is not making any sense and he's using words in a weird, awkward, and stupid way, he's calling the teen takeovers, which is what the media calls them, these mob actions, these flash mob robberies, these flash mob assaults, these takeovers of the streets, trends. So he's saying many of these trends that were trending, we actually dealt with those trends and they're trending in the right direction. Now, if I were Brandon Johnson, I wouldn't be talking about trends because the data on his administration specifically is not very good. Chicago, over the past 5 years, not getting better, getting significantly worse. But he's saying, look, these trends, because the kids, they're just being trendy, taking over and destroying and looting stores and doing this repeatedly. We've intercepted a bunch of them. Now, by the way, he was actually asked for clarification on how many of these mob actions he intercepted or the Chicago police intercepted, and he had no specific examples. But he said, trust me, in the 12 weeks that he's been mayoring since he's been on the job, he's intercepted a lot of these trends that he won't even call out by name. Also, the idea that you want to treat people in an undignified way.
Many people expect, us to treat people undignified.
This is just doublespeak nonsense talk, just like labeling this trends, because the people who are being treated by the city of Chicago in an undignified way are the law-abiding citizens who have to deal with mobs of teenagers destroying businesses, destroying their neighborhoods, destroying stores, and all of that. The dignified response to this is to hold people accountable and not pretend that they're innocent victims who are incapable of actually being responsible for their actions. So, Brendan, you're dead wrong. You are treating them, talking down to them in a very undignified way. If you had some respect for the people that you're talking about, if you had expectations of good behavior, then you would condemn them when they participate in terrible behavior.
And so that's because there's been a real strategic effort on the part of my administration to coordinate with civic leaders, with community-based organizations, again, with city departments. And so we're seeing some of the fruit of that labor. And I'm grateful again that the men and women who serve this city on the front line are providing the type of system of care that's going to be necessary in order to bring structure and calm in the city.
So again, I need to point out that the teen takeover did happen. They did destroy stores, people got injured, it was chaotic, some police made some arrests, but Brandon Johnson, our buddy over here, Mayor Johnson right here, decided that it would be a good time to congratulate himself for coordinating with the community leaders to stop a bunch of these trends that you didn't see get stopped, and we haven't provided any evidence of them being stopped because, wow, he's such a great guy, he's such a great mayor, look at him mayoring on the job.
Follow up, when you say trends, what do you mean? Can you give us an example of a couple of the trends you're seeing?
Oh, you're not aware of some of these large gatherings?
So the reporter, because Brandon Johnson is speaking in an incoherent, ridiculous way, asked him what trends he's referring to, and he just clarified that he's talking about these large gatherings, which again, he's labeling trends for some reason, possibly, and I know this might shock you, because he's more interested in denying the criminality than actually dealing with it. So the reporter you hear say, oh, that's what you're saying? You're not speaking English. You're not speaking proper, or is it properly? Who knows? Irony if I said it the wrong way in the correction. But yeah, Brendan, you're not really talking about what needs to be talked about. And then another additional reporter asks a follow-up question, and this makes Brendan very angry. Brendan smash.
You're talking about the mob actions?
No, that's not appropriate. We're not talking about mob actions. I didn't say that.
So the reporter asks a standard clarification question, which is, are you referring to the mob actions when these teens mob up and they attack storefronts, people, take over streets, and all of that in a giant group? And Brendan gets really angry. And you can see him say no, because again, to the progressive left, the problem isn't the actual issue. You talking about it is the actual issue. And the fact that this person brought it up and used an adjective that was accurate rather than trends is really aggravating Brendan Johnson, and now he's going to say something incredibly and utterly idiotic.
Hold on a second, okay? Respectfully, these large gatherings, just hold on a second, y'all. I promise you, we have time to talk. It's important that we speak of these dynamics in an appropriate way.
So he says these large gatherings, notice the change in tone of his voice, and then somebody interjects that caused damage because they know what he's doing, he's denying it, he's downplaying it. They weren't even sure what the hell he was talking about when he was talking about trends, which is exactly what he wants, to not talk about the issue. And now they're trying to clarify because he's getting really mad and he's about to call these people very bad people because they decided to use language that Brendan, our buddy boy, the mayor of Chicago, found offensive. Look at how offended he is by the language that they use, by the word mob versus the actual mob violence, the actual attacks, the actual trends going on in the city of Chicago. Again, think about this man's priorities.
This is not to obfuscate what is actually taking place, but we have to be very careful when we use language to describe certain behavior.
The way that this man is talking is so condescending, so obnoxious. You would think that Sam Seder is his press secretary, and he's saying it's not to obfuscate the situation, although once you finally clarified what we're talking about, he's obfuscating the situation. That is exactly the purpose of this. That is exactly what Brendan Johnson's doing, our buddy boy who doesn't actually want to address the issue of criminality.
There's history in this city. I mean, to refer to children as like baby Al Capones is not appropriate.
This is one of the dumbest, most absurd, insanely idiotic, obtuse statements that you could make in response to the word mob when you're describing a group of people gathering together to commit criminality. They didn't say the mob, and I'm hoping everybody understands that Brandon, buddy old boy, is being ridiculous here, and I'm honestly hoping for the safety of every resident of the city of Chicago that Brandon himself knows that he's being ridiculous here, although I fear that he is not. Nobody, and I mean absolutely nobody, was describing the teen takeovers, the riots committed by these teenagers, the destruction of that 7-Eleven, as actions akin to the mob, to the mafia, to Al Capone. And the fact that he would say there's history and then give us this idiotic micro smile, you could see it right there, where he's like, I get to educate people about the history of the city of Chicago before delivering that line, really makes me lose faith not only in the city of Chicago, but in humanity as a whole. This person got more votes than another human being. Some other human being was deemed less worthy for the office of mayor in the city of Chicago than this man right here, who is now pretending, hopefully, I pray, I'm not even religious, and I'm praying that he's pretending to be offended by an alleged Al Capone comparison that no sentient human being thinks actually occurred. I'm pretty sure if I were to drag out a pig, you know what? Pig's kind of a smart animal. If I were to drag out some kind of other animal that I can't think of right now because I'm messing up on flubbing in the moment and I'm just going to roll with it, and ask them if they thought that this was a reference to Al Capone and the mafia, they would say definitely not. They would learn to talk to tell you directly to your face that that is ridiculous and absurd. But Brendan Johnson, with this stupid micro-expression smile, look at it, decides to just go in head first, dive into the idiocy, and say something like that.
So let me finish, please, okay? What I'm saying is that when you ask for very specific examples, there have been other attempts to have large gatherings, and we've intercepted those attempts. Mary Ann, do you have a question?
So he goes to, oh, there were other attempts to have large gatherings, you know, like a wedding, who knows what we're even talking about, maybe like a funeral, and we've intercepted those large, non-described gatherings that are definitely not like Al Capone and the Mafia. Now, needless to say, this did not go over well with the Chicago press. Anybody who saw this video knew Brandon Johnson was being ridiculous, and a local news segment actually took time to take him to task, and I want to play some of that because they make fun of him because what he said was completely stupid.
So the mayor said that the police have actually stopped more of these. We called them teen takeovers. He called them trends from happening. Where did trends?
I'm not sure where that comes from.
So I appreciate the local news for opening up this segment by pointing out how absurd calling the actual takeovers not a trend, but just trends. Not even saying they're trendy in the moment, or this is something that is a trend. He says that they're trends. And all the people on the panel decide to make fun of that in the open. And then this woman, who I've never heard of, don't even care who she is, but I'm on board with what she says because she's making fun of Brandon Johnson.
I'm not sure where that comes from, but he objects to us referring to them as mobs because he feels that that's demonizing and criminalizing young people, and that that's something that's been going on for too long.
So what's
right? So I guess
go ahead.
fair. Okay, so that's a point.
So yeah, Laura Washington, thank you for making my point for me. Thank you for being dismissive and derisive to Brandon Johnson. He definitely deserves it. If you call these trends, if you downplay them, if you minimize them, and all of that, then teens are going to think it's okay. If you're afraid to criminalize criminal action, by the way, they're committing crimes that should be criminalized. That's why we got a criminal justice system. Then you're not actually going to produce positive results. And it seems like, as I said, that Brandon Johnson is more interested in the language that is being used to describe these things than the actual actions themselves.
But people are wondering, you know, if you take this sort of very cavalier attitude toward it, aren't you encouraging more of this kind of thing? If you're saying these are just kids having fun, the kids are going to get that message as they can continue to do it.
Yeah.
Well, then the question is, what more should the mayor and the city be doing?
Well, what they say they're doing is, again, his whole thing's always been a holistic approach. You got to get these kids jobs. You got to get them social services. You have to give them other things to occupy their time, other alternatives. And that's part of his overall plan of action.
So she brings up the fact that Brandon Johnson says these kids need jobs. I will point out that a bunch of them are below the working age. One of the kids that was arrested in this riot, and yes, it's a mob riot, Brandon Johnson, was actually 12 years old, and then social services and all of this. And of course, this is the ideology of penal welfarism, the idea that the criminal justice system should just be an extension of the welfare system, that its underlying causes and whatnot, and it has nothing to do with the fact that law enforcement has been completely disempowered. In fact, we're going to have to do a story a little bit later in the week. I'll try not to back-to-back the Chicago things about how a robbery spree was able to go on, and the police could have intercepted the robbers, but another idiotic policy out of the city of Chicago, a do not pursue policy, ultimately ended up leading to multiple armed robberies occurring, and of course, that could easily have caused the death of any one of those robbery victims. But yeah, trends is, I guess, the new word for riots. They're done with the civil rights action, the mostly peaceful whatever, and Brandon Johnson is a clown of all clowns. However, of course, unfortunately, he's got a long road ahead of him as mayor of Chicago. But hey, those are just my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you liked the video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on my social medias, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about the thing that I spoke about in the video. Until next time.